Hello, and welcome to another lesson from Level Up Mathematics. In today's lesson, we will be learning about the percent proportion. So recall that two equal ratios are also called a proportion. We can solve proportions by determining the scale factor. The percent proportion is just a special proportion which can be used to find a missing part, whole, or percent. And in a percent proportion, the first ratio is the percentage over 100, and the second ratio is the part over the whole. So percent over 100 is equal to part over whole. Now, sometimes in a word problem, the part is represented with the word is, and the whole is represented with the word of. So sometimes people say the percent proportion is percent over 100 is equal to is over of. All right, now let's look at that percent proportion in a couple of word problems. So in example 1, it says use the percent proportion to solve each of the following. So problem A says what is 40% of 500? Now, the word after of is your whole. So in this problem, I know the whole is 500. I also know the percent is 40%. So in this problem, what we don't know is the part. So that's what we're trying to find. What is 40% over 100? So we'll say 40 over 100, that's our first ratio, percent over 100, is equal to the part over the whole. So since we don't know the part, I'll put an X or unknown over the whole, which is 500. Now, to solve this proportion, we need to find the scale factor that's being used. So look at your denominator and notice that we can, if I took 500 and divided it by 100, we don't need to use long division because anytime we divide by 100, we're just moving the decimal in two places. So 500 divided by 100 is 5. So our scale factor here is 5. So if I multiply the denominator by 5, I must also multiply the numerator by 5. So 40 times 5 would be 200. So 40, so we could say x equals 200. Now, let's write this as a statement. 40% of 500 is 200. All right. Problem B. 29 is what percent of 50? So the number after of is our whole. So in this problem, our whole is 50. We don't know the percent. That's what we're trying to find this time. So I'm going to put a question mark by percent. So that means 29 is our part. And see how it's associated with the word is? All right. So here, my percent proportion will be x, because I don't know the percent, over 100 is equal to the part, which is 29, over the whole, which is 50. All right, now we're trying to find our scale factor. So look at your denominators. In this problem, to get to scale of 50 to 100, I would have to multiply it by 2. 50 times 2 is 100. So if I multiply the denominator by 2, I must also multiply the numerator by 2 to find our missing part. So 29 times 2, that would be 58. So 29 is 58% of 50. In other words, it's a little bit more than 50%. Okay. Problem C. 3 is 20% of what number? So what's after the word of? What number? That means in this problem, we don't know the whole. But we know the percent is 20, and we know the part is 3. So the percent over 100, 20 over 100, is equal to the part, which is 3, over the whole, which in this case is x. Now, to find your scale factor here, we're going to have to do this one a little different. We can't work with the denominators, and 3 won't go into 20 evenly. But look at the first fraction. What could I multiply 20 by to get 100? Well, 20 times 5 is 100. So if I can multiply the top number by 5 to get the bottom number, I could do the same thing over here. 3 times 5 would give me 15. So 3 is 20% of 15. All right, D. 12 is what percent of 150? So in this problem, our whole is 150. I do not know the percent, and the part would be 12. So I do not know the percent. So my first ratio would be x over 100, since I don't know the percent. And then the part, 12 over the whole, 150. All right, now here it's a little bit harder to find our scale factor. Let's see. So let's go this way. 150 divided by 100. Remember, to divide by 100, you just move your decimal in 2 places. So our scale factor is 1.5. So if I take 150 and divide it by, let me write that down, 1.5, I'll get 100. So if I divide the bottom by 1.5, I must also divide the top number by 1.5. So I'm going to take 12 and divide it by 1.5. But remember, when we're dividing by a decimal, the divisor must be a whole number. So I'm going to multiply these both by 10, and this would be 120 divided by 15. So let's do that here. 15 goes into 120. I'm going to make a little ratio table. 1 times 15 is 15. If I double that, I get 30. If I double that again, I get 60. If I double that again, I get 120. So 15 goes into 120 8 times. So here x would equal 8. So 12 is 8% of 150. All right, E. What is 72% of 250? So I know my whole is 250. I know my percent is 72%. I do not know the part. I do not know the part. So 72 over 100 equals x over 250. All right. So I want to know, what do I have to scale by to get from 72 to my unknown? So I'm going to have to ask myself, what am I scaling 100 by to get to 250? So 250 divided by 100, remember, is just 2.5. So I'm multiplying 100 by 2.5 to get to 250. So I must multiply the top by 2.5. So 72 times 2.5. 2 times 5 is 10. Carry the 1. 36. 0. So it'd be 4 and 14. Add that up. 8. Now remember, we have one number after the decimal, which means I have to move my decimal in one place. So x would equal 180. So 72% of 250 is 180. F, what is 3% of 36,000? So I know my whole is 36,000. I know my percent is 3. I do not know the part. So 3 over 100 equals x over 36,000. So I need to know the scale factor. So 36,000 divide by 100. Remember, you just move your decimal in 2 places, 1, 2. That would be a scale factor of 360. So 100 times 360 is 36,000. So to get the top, we must also multiply by 360. So 360 times 3. 18, 1, 9, 10. So 3% of 36,000 is 1,080. All right, example 2. Set up a percent proportion to find the missing value. So 12 is 25% of what number? So I know my first fraction is 25 over 100 because they gave us the percent. My second fraction, they gave us the part, but I do not know the whole. All right? Do not know the whole. Now, to find your scale factor here, 12 will not go into 25 evenly, but what I am noticing is I can find the scale factor of the numerator to the denominator. So if I multiply the numerator by 4, 25 times 4, that'll give me the 100. So if I multiply this numerator by 4, 12 times 4 gives me 48. So 12 is 25% of 48. Problem B, what is 22% of 250? So I know my first ratio is 22 over 100 because they gave me the percent. They did not give me the part, but they gave me the whole. Okay. So my scale factor here is 2.5. So to get the numerator, I would have to multiply 22 times 2.5. So 2 times 5 is 10, is carry the 1, 10, 11, add a 0, 2 times 2 is 4, 2 times 2 is 4, add all that up. Okay, I had one number after the decimal, so I need to bring in this decimal one place. So I'm getting x is equal to 55. So 22% of 250 is 55. All right. Problem C. 60 is what percent of 150? So I do not know my percent, so x over 100, and my part is 60, and my whole is 150. Now this time we're trying to find the first number, so I'm going to have to use division. So here 150 divided by 1.5 will give me 100, so I must also divide the 60 by 1.5. And 60 divided by 1.5, remember when we're dividing, we have to divide by a whole number. So I'm going to multiply these both by 10. So this would be 600 divided by 15. So 15 goes into 600. 15 goes into 60 4 times. 4 times 15 is 60. Subtract and bring down. 15 goes into 0 0 times. So x is equal to 40. So 60 is 40% of 150. All right, problem D. 50 is what percent of 25? All right, I do not know the percent, x over 100. I know my part is 50 and my whole is 25. So there's a couple ways we could do this. The first thing I'm noticing that if I multiply 25 by 4, I would get 100. So if I do that to the top, 50 times 4, I get 200. So 50 is 200% of 25. And that concludes today's lesson, Introduction to the Percent Proportion.